And welcome back to the show. For more than 40 years, the Coalition for the Homeless has developed and implemented humane, cost effective strategies to end mass homelessness in New York City. The model programs represent solutions that can dramatically reduce the homeless population as well as prevent homelessness for those most at risk. Joining us now and sharing more details, we're pleased to have Jacquelyn Simone, who's the policy director at the Coalition for the Homeless. And Jacquelyn, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
When we look right now, and from your perspective, just give me your insight as to how do you assess the homeless problem right now in New York City? Are we seeing things get better, worse? Where are we now?
So we continue to face record homelessness in New York City. I think many people who walk around the streets perceive that there might be more people panhandling or sleeping on the subways or on street corners, but that's actually a very small percentage of the overall homelessness crisis in New York City. So in New York, we have a right to shelter, and that means that the city is legally obligated to provide a bed in a shelter for anyone who wants and needs it. So the people that we see sleeping on the streets are actually the minority of the homeless population. So we have a few thousand people on the streets. We don't know how many people exactly. We do know that the city's annual point. And then we also have tens of thousands of people who are sleeping in the street, in shelters on any given night. So there are nearly 50,000 people on any given night in shelters overseen by the Department of Homeless Services. And then there are also thousands of others in shelters run by the Department of Youth and Community Development, the Human Resources Administration, and the Department of Housing Preservation and Development. So this is really a historic crisis.
And when we talk about this crisis, obviously it continues to get, from our lens also, worse, that needs more attention. Your organization goes front and center in dealing with a lot of this. Talk to us about your organization and some of the work that you do.
Yeah. So Coalition for the Homeless was founded in 1981, actually in conjunction with the litigation that established the right to shelter in New York City. So we are the court-appointed independent monitor of the shelter system. And in the past 4 decades, we have created what is currently 11 different direct service programs that are meeting people's immediate needs every single day and night in New York City. So we have a nightly mobile soup kitchen that serves about 1,000 people in Manhattan and the Bronx every single night of the year. We've never missed a night of operation since 1985. We have programs for homeless children, including a summer camp upstate. We have job training programs for homeless and low-income women. We have crisis intervention programs where people who are homeless or who are at risk of homelessness can get one-on-one case management assistance and access benefits. We help people access permanent housing and supportive housing. We help people who have HIV and have experienced homelessness. And we also do eviction prevention work as well. So folks who are behind on rent and who are facing eviction can access Coalition for the Homeless's resources to help them pay off their rent arrears and stay in their homes. So we really try to address the full range of people's immediate needs. And then my job is taking the lessons that we learn from serving about 3,500 homeless and extremely low income New Yorkers every single day and using that to inform our advocacy work. I sometimes say that my job is to try to put the coalition out of business, right? I'm trying to address the more systemic factors that are driving homelessness and housing insecurity and look at how we can have large scale policy solutions from the city, state, and federal government to reduce the need for our services overall.
And give me this, because now we know that the mayor has really come up with a new plan to really address homelessness and the homeless crisis, I should say. And that's our Housing Our Neighbors plan. Your thoughts on the mayor's plan and how effective you think it'll be?
So I think that there are some admirable parts of the Housing Our Neighbors plan. I think the most important thing is that they did actually incorporate feedback from people with lived experience of homelessness. And that's not really something we've seen codified into policies prior to this administration. So they do deserve credit for that. Also, the fact that we have a unified plan that is treating homelessness as a housing issue rather than separate plans for housing, homelessness, and NYCHA is really notable. And there are a few there are many reforms in the plan, many of which will address things like administrative barriers and accelerating supportive housing. And the administration voiced support for fair chance for housing, which would ban discrimination in housing based on arrest or conviction history. So there's a lot of positive parts of the plan. Our concern, however, is that this plan does not actually propose expanding the housing production specifically for homeless and extremely low income households. And that's really where we saw the prior administration was falling short. They were touting these record levels of housing production, but the housing that was being created was not actually affordable to people who were in shelters or on the streets, or people who had the lowest incomes and were really bearing the brunt of the housing crisis. So rather than committing to a great expansion of housing for those populations, this plan is more vague in that respect. And we've heard that the administration plans to continue the current production levels of the prior administration, which we know are inadequate. So that's why we've really been calling for the Adams administration to, yes, take the administrative reforms and break down the red tape and other obstacles that people face, but then also invest city resources in creating at least 6,000 apartments every single year for homeless households and 6,000 apartments for extremely low income households every single year. We really think that kind of investment is what is needed to actually reduce homelessness, in addition to all of the great administrative reforms that are in the Housing Our Neighbors plan.
Work actually increased given the fact of COVID-19. We knew that a part of what we had to deal with was this eviction moratorium. We talked a lot about how the eviction moratorium was going to play a part in possibly increasing the number of homeless New Yorkers. And now that the money's run out, a lot of people have literally run out of options. And are we finding that now that we have an even greater problem now that the eviction moratorium is done?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see the impact of the expiration of the eviction moratorium. Obviously, housing court does take some time to go through the formal eviction process. And fortunately, people do have protections, like if they apply for the emergency rental assistance program at the state level, they are given some eviction protections while their application is being processed, and they might end up getting funding that can resolve their rent arrears. So it's not an instantaneous flood as soon as the eviction moratorium expired. However, we are seeing more and more people in housing court, and even protections that people have, like a right to counsel in housing court that we and other advocates fought for so hard years ago, are really struggling under the weight of the volume of cases. So we would like to see more investments from every level of government to invest in homelessness prevention, because we know that it's much more cost effective, and it also is the humane thing to do to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place. We're also seeing, however, that eviction is not the only driver of homelessness. And throughout the pandemic, even with the eviction moratorium, we saw many single adults in particular become homeless because these admirable policies like decarceration were not actually following through with answering the question of where people would go once they were released from prisons and jails. So we definitely support that we shouldn't have mass incarceration, which we know disproportionately affects Black and Latinx New Yorkers. But we need to also do the work to ensure that when people are released from incarceration, that they are connected to stable housing rather than just being discharged to a shelter, which is not really the most effective place for people to re-enter society. So it's making sure that there are these robust housing investments so that we can reduce homelessness and prevent it before it begins.
I think the question that's on a lot of people's minds is we look at New York, we see a lot of buildings going up.
Mm.
See a lot of skyscrapers going up, and office buildings. But yet and still, when we look across the city, we find there's so many people that still struggle on a daily basis that are homeless and really on the verge of being homeless. When you talk about services, I'll come from this perspective. Sometimes people feel as though there's not enough in terms of addressing homeless people on the ground. And there can be more that's definitely done, which you've outlined right here. But talk to me about services, because Are there enough services to really be able to deal with the population of people that you're seeing on a daily basis?
Hmm, that's a great question. So we know New York City is actually a fairly service-rich place. Is a robust social service support network. We definitely have issues that people face in terms of accessing things like mental health care and substance use treatment. And those challenges have been exacerbated during the pandemic. But we also know from decades of research that housing is so essential to helping people get back on their feet. So the efficacy of services would be enhanced if people actually had stable housing first. This is a proven model, and that's why things like supportive housing are so crucial in New York City. So the idea is help people move indoors, give them the stable foundation of a home so they don't have to worry about where they're sleeping at night. They don't have to worry about sweeps or feeling unsafe in a shelter, and that stress can be taken away, and then wrap the support services around them. So I think that too often the conversation is, do we need housing or services to address homelessness? And the answer is it's really both. And of course, there's a range of needs as well, right? Not every person who's homeless has a mental illness or other challenge where they need robust services, but we need to make sure that there is a continuum of fully funded services that are accessible to people in addition to permanent housing. And your point earlier about, we see new construction all around the city. I think it's hard to walk more than a couple blocks without seeing construction crews working on housing or offices or other structures in the city. But the problem is that the housing that is being built is too often not affordable to the people who need it the most. And I think that the housing and vacancy survey data that we saw a couple months ago really highlighted that this housing crisis is not being felt equally among all people. We know that people with the lowest incomes are almost universally rent burdened, meaning that they're spending at least 30% of their income on rent. And in fact, most of them are spending more than half of their income on rent. So that's why we really want Mayor Adams to look at that data and to ensure that as the city is financing housing and is incentivizing affordable housing, that it's actually affordable to the people who are extremely low income or who are currently homeless.
When we talk about education amongst people, there's so many people out there that are walking, trying to live, trying to make it from day to day. We know New York is hard to live in, right? Rent prices are high, employment, inflation, all these things every New Yorker is actually contending with. Talk to me about awareness. How aware do you think New Yorkers are of the homeless crisis, given the fact that so many of us are just trying to make it from day to day? I may not be so aware of how bad it really is.
Yeah. And I think that many people are aware of the visible parts of the homelessness crisis, right? When people think about homelessness, they think about the person that they assume is homeless sleeping on the subway train or on their street corner. But again, they might not realize the full scale of this crisis and that the child that is sitting next to them on the subway train trying to get to school is actually also homeless and is also in a shelter. So I think that so many New Yorkers are aware that we have an affordable housing crisis. I think that only the very wealthiest New Yorkers would tell you that they're comfortably affording housing in this city. So people understand that, and then they see the visibility of homelessness on the street. But I think that too often people are reacting to this crisis from a place of stereotypes and stigma, and they aren't connecting that homelessness is a housing issue and that we need to address the affordable housing crisis, as well as make services more accessible as a way to actually reduce the number of our neighbors who are sleeping outside or who are sleeping in shelters.
So where do you go from here with your work?
So I think we're going to continue advocating for Mayor Adams, as well as the state and the federal government, to invest in housing at a scale to meet the need. We were, as I said, very encouraged by many parts of the Housing Our Neighbors plan, but we need more accountability, and we definitely need more robust investments in housing for people who are homeless and extremely low income. This is a racial justice issue, and we know that because of the legacy of persistent systemic discrimination and racism in our housing policies and our criminal legal system, that the people who are most impacted by the affordable housing crisis are Black and Latinx New Yorkers. And I really think that as people are talking about the need to undo systemic racism and address those inequities, we really need to start with housing and making sure that every single New Yorker has safe, affordable housing. So we need more investment from the federal level and from the state level, and we also need more investment from the city level. And in the meantime, we really want Mayor Adams to stop this very punitive policing-based response to unsheltered homelessness, and instead of, throwing people's belongings in garbage trucks and forcing them to move along and ejecting them from the subways, we want the city to focus on giving people access to permanent housing as well as safe private shelters so that they don't have to just be chased from place to place by police officers.
And for those who want to partner with your work and be supportive of what they do, or what you do, I should say, what do they do in order to be a partner with you?
Yeah, so our website is coalitionforthehomeless.org. We have a variety of opportunities for people to take action depending on schedules and how the pandemic is going. We also have opportunities for people to volunteer or to donate. Many of our programs, like the Grand Central Food Program, that mobile soup kitchen that I talked about, are largely staffed by volunteers. So there's a variety of ways that people can get involved. And I also encourage people to be engaged with local politics. I think that, again, too often these policies are made from a place of stigma and stereotypes. And I think that we really need all New Yorkers to come together and advocate for housing as the solution to homelessness. And that will actually create a groundswell of activism that can actually reduce this crisis in New York City.
I guess it is a little bit frustrating when you have somebody that comes with a top-down approach, right? I'm just here in government. I think this is what's best, but really doesn't have the boots on the ground to be able to do that and know what's going on. And sometimes that can be frustrating, especially for those people who are actually doing the work to say, "Hey, you think you know it's best, but the truth is we know it's best because we kind of like do the work every day."
Yeah, that's true. And also, I will say for anyone who's watching who is homeless, especially people who are in shelters or on the streets, we also at the coalition have a client advisory group that meets regularly and that helps inform our advocacy work. So that information is also on our website, coalitionforthehomeless.org. So if you need services, you can access them through the various hotlines that we have, and you can get that info on our website. Contact us via email or by phone, or check out our website. But we'd love for all New Yorkers to get involved in our work.
And Jacqueline, before I let you go, I want to ask the question. Maybe you might have this information or not, but there's so many times people ask the question about transitioning out of becoming homeless. What are we finding by way of numbers? Are we finding that while we're talking about people who are becoming homeless, are we seeing good statistics in people who left homelessness and went on to a place of a more secure life?
That's a really good question. So unfortunately, in recent years, the average length of stay in the main shelter system has been increasing because it is increasingly challenging for people to access permanent housing after they've been in shelters. That's because of the lack of affordable housing, unlawful discrimination against source of income for people who have vouchers, and other barriers that people might face. So we're trying to address those challenges. And I'm encouraged that the administration is definitely trying to look at how to shorten the length of stay in shelters through those reforms. But we also know that the city's own data clearly shows that people who are connected to long-term housing vouchers and subsidies are very successful in terms of maintaining their housing and not returning to homelessness, whereas people who exit without any kind of housing assistance might have a return to homelessness. So that's why we really need more investments at every level of government in those kinds of housing supports so that people are connected to affordable housing that is also stable for the long term.
Jacquelyn Simone, we're going to leave it there, but thank you so much for the work that you do, and great talking to you today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.